what a great way to end the day. I feel like we've gone full circle back to maybe Elliot designed it like that. Did you, Elliot? That's what you did?
Almost as if there was a plan.
It, almost like there was a plan. We don't wing it, you know. Right, Lucy, over to you.
I am very conscious of the fact that I am the only thing standing between you and a glass of wine. More importantly, I'm the only thing standing between me and a glass of wine. And my job, I'm Lucy Jeynes from Larch Consulting. I have been in the sector for not as long as ISS. 1901, did you say? That's a long time. But when we were talking about the history today, you know, some of us have been in the sector for a long time, and I think that that is evidenced, isn't it, in some of those statistics about how, I'm sorry to say, how the sector is ageing. So my job is to sum up everything that we've covered today, summarise every single person's presentation one by one, bring it together with the key themes, and then give you a call to action, all just off the top of my head, so that'll be fine. Right, okay, let's give it a try. So, harking back to this morning in the introduction from David, today we are talking about a route map to the future for FM. So what do we mean by that? We're talking about the need for a more advanced sector. We're at an inflection point, really. We need to develop our roadmap for the future and think about whether or not we've come far enough, fast enough. I think we probably have. But what would we like FM to be like in the future going forward? Because actually, with some of the leaders that we have in this room, we together between us can envision and create some of that ourselves. So to Sarah's point of, you know, somebody ought to refresh these things, we might be those somebodies, mightn't we? So that's where we come back at the end to the call to action. Some of the key themes that we've covered before I go into summarising the individual sessions. We've talked about, God, the light's really funny here. I can't even see my own notes here now. We talked about the FM leadership time bomb. 44% of FMs are over 55. 30% of the current workforce will retire by 2035. So there is a ticking time bomb there, isn't there? The workplace is now a place where people have to want to come to rather than have to come to, and that's different from how it used to be perhaps before the pandemic, which was already starting to evolve in that way. And a building might be smart, but that doesn't make people feel like they belong. So there are a lot of human things in there, aren't there? How do we evolve to the next iteration in our provocative future, as Andy called it? And what is the next chapter of the story, and how much of that next chapter can we write ourselves in an intentional and planned way? So, we started off with our keynote from Dr. Mel Bull from Nottingham Trent Business School. Leaders need to be bold, curious, humble, and ready to redesign how work works. She told us to unfreeze and get our jelly on and get off the hamster wheel. So, because 30% of today's workforce are about to retire, and that people want from their work, and this has come up in a lot of the presentations, they want purpose, flexibility, well-being, autonomy, and a meaningful connection with their organisation. None of those things sound like something that's going to happen through AI, do they? They sound very people-y. And then next we had Sarah Hodge, who summarised the whole of the history of the profession, and that was really interesting for those of us that have been on that journey. I don't know whether it was interesting for people that are new to that. But do you know what I was thinking is we have achieved a lot because we have made a profession from a series of activities. And I think that whatever we think we want to call ourselves and how we want to organise ourselves and all of those other conversations that we need to have, I think we have made a discrete professional discipline, and we've got everything that goes with that: qualifications, standards, bodies, conferences, job roles and people. And that is an achievement, isn't it? Because we've come there from being people that just fixed problems and sorted stuff out. So that is great. We talked about the fact that, well, I think we've made a profession, but we don't really have a clear brand or a good story for FM yet, do we? We don't say to people, I work in FM, and they're like, oh, brilliant, I've always wanted to work in FM. They're either a bit blank, or they say, oh, I'd love to work in radio, or they just don't know what we're on about. I asked AI in one of the breaks to design some job titles that would appeal to Gen Z people, to make them think that FM was a sexy industry to work in, and we haven't got time to share those now, but see me afterwards if you'd like some new job titles for your organisation. I think that we also said, Sarah said that people need to, FM people have common sense, logic, problem-solving abilities, but we also need to tap into our imagination and our creativity and our visualisation if we want to think about where to go next, rather than just get pulled along by other people who are going to lead that dialogue about what work looks like and where our role happens to be in that. Always enjoy a presentation from John Raspin at Frost & Sullivan, because I like all the facts and the figures and the charts. So here's an interesting thing. Not just that FM is 3% of GDP, because that's big, isn't it? That's good. And that we're slightly outperforming the economy. But there are lots of service providers here, and I know that lots of those service providers that are here have got venture capital backers behind them, kind of with the hand in the small of the back. So I thought it might be interesting for you to have a conversation when you go back to say, if the overall projected growth of the FM market is 3%, but we are targeting X percent more than that, how is that actually going to happen? Where is that going to come from? Because another fact that came out later in one of the other presentations was that over 80% of facilities managers on the client side are targeting cost reductions next year. So there's a bit of a challenge, if you're on a service provider side, that you might need to ponder, because those numbers, to me, they don't dovetail, do they? There's a bit of a challenge there. We've talked about how, John talked about how customer sector specialisation is the biggest shift for service providers now, so that might be the answer, mightn't it? There is higher growth in some of those client areas, and so maybe you need to think about who is likely to grow a bit more and how you can map against that. And certainly we're seeing that in Larch. One of the things that we always like to see, and it never sounds like we do, but that if a tender is out and people say, actually, that's not for us, I'd much rather you said that than said, yeah, we bid for everything, and if we haven't got time to do it, we just chuck it into ChatGPT and get them to do the bid. That is not the answer. Top tip. We then had Steve Gladwin from Nodus Solutions. I remember back in the day, Steve and I were the naughty young people in the IWFM, and now we're, at the kind of old guard end, aren't we? Steve was pointing out that the world is changing faster than our capability pipeline is changing. So again, there's another challenge there, isn't there? Our buildings can't perform without the right people to lead and curate that performance. If 40% of FMs are over 55, knowledge transfer is going to be key. And actually, we had some tips about how we might do that a bit later on in the sessions. But the first step, Steve says, is to develop a growth mindset. So again, that's another thing that we ought to be adding to our arsenal of capabilities, as well as being a jelly, using our imagination, visualising, storytelling. These are all things that AI is not very good at, that people are particularly good at. We then had Andy Targel. He's like a model of how to present loads of information really fast within his time slot and still keep it interesting. Thank you, Andy. You get the prize. Let's remember how far we've come, because we have actually been really good at learning stuff and transforming already. So whilst we like to beat ourselves over the head and say that, we're not doing very well, actually, if you think about those of us that started in FM 30 years ago, it wasn't even the problem of standing around the printer to get the job tickets printed. I remember the very first project I worked on, the client said, we think we need to start to use computers because we can't get the cards to go in our Kalamazoo card system anymore for our planned maintenance. Because you used to do your PPMs on these, who can remember those? That'll show you how old. You had a little box of cards and they were all different colours for the different months and the weeks, and they had little notches in, and then you did your jobs and then you put them to the back, and then the next one came to the front, and that was before we'd invented desktop printing. Oh God, well, it was long time before the internet. It was a long time before the internet, when we were sort of saying to people, you could do this on a computer, and they're like, I don't think so. I don't think that would be possible. But we have been good at learning stuff. Andy said that over 80% of FM leaders from their research are prioritising cost efficiency this year. So think about that in relation to your growth plans. And do you know what a beautifully clear explanation of what systems architecture is? Wasn't that lovely? Didn't I explain it really well about what that meant and how you should be designing your infrastructure and not having that other chart that looked like just a big box of string? Andy also had my favourite chart last year where he had all of the systems that FM have, and then at the bottom it said Excel spreadsheets, and it was all balanced on top. Do you remember that chart? I think some of us are still a little bit like that. But a really good takeaway from Andy's session is get conversant in C-suite business cases to link that to your technology investment. And the C-suite are not interested in what a system will do. They're only really going to be interested in what outcomes will that achieve for the business and how does that map into their strategic objectives and help them to achieve them. So if you're not getting the spend that you need, it might be that you're not building the case that is right to unlock that spend. And then we had Sunil Shah from Aclaro Advisory talking about sustainability, but actually again there was a question there about are we collecting the right data and are we using it well? Political agendas around sustainability are quite divisive, but it is still part of the core business case, just a little bit more quietly. And commitment and the drive forward continues, although there has been an adjustment of targets, but that's probably just a kind of reality check against those targets. It's not really a rowing back from the targets, it's just a rebasing of realistically where we think we can get to. One of the things that's come out in a few presentations now is that Scope 3 is likely to be 80 to 90% of your emissions. Didn't we hear from Sodexo that it's 98% of their emissions are Scope 3? So we need to continue to grow our understanding of Scope 3 and not just think we've dealt with Scope 1 and Scope 2. And the client side need to have more ownership of that as well. We then had Mark Griffiths and Gordon Mitchell talking about standards and why they matter. Well, why do they matter? Codification, standardisation and documenting and process mapping is one way to help achieve that knowledge transfer. If everyone is going to get old and leave or lose their marbles and forget how to do everything, if you've actually got everything processed and written down and it's against a set of standards, you've got much more chance of someone else being able to pick that up and continue with it than if it's just all in your head and you've just made it up. So that is one powerful argument for standards, and also that then from one organisation to another there's a common understanding of what things are. So we're still grappling with how to define and measure, I would say, some of the softer issues like workplace experience and social value. Personally, I don't believe we're there yet, but that whole kind of compliance, consistency and management of risk in some of those more technical FM areas, standards have really helped us to get on top of that. And it's also another step in professionalising what we do, because we've got a whole set of recognised international and national standards around that now. We're not just making it up as we go along. It's a structured profession. We had a panel discussion around the future of the workplace. We were talking about selling the dream of FM and focusing on the goals. Sustainability goals are achievable. Yes, they are. How do we persuade organisations to prioritise leadership development for FM? I mean, that's a good question, isn't it? You know, have a think about how much your organisations are prepared to spend on leadership development, because if people problems are going to be the main problems, then they're likely to be solved by people-focused solutions rather than buying a new bit of technology or changing your building or something, aren't they? We had the Technology and FM Award. 20 years of that award. It is fun to judge. It's great to see people coming along and showing you all of their cool new stuff that's coming over the horizon. So, and they were all really interesting this year. So well done to the highly commended, and very well done to Arcus for winning with their system, which was focused on achieving outcomes, which again is where we need to be with FM. It's not just stuff that we do, but what does that result in? Why is it important? What has it achieved? And we then had Louisa Clark from the Human-Centric Workplace, whose book you can have a look at later, because when you go into the bar, there's a stand and you can buy the book. You can meet the authors. I've met them. They're famous, and you can ask them a little bit more about that. But Louisa was talking about how the people issue is the biggest risk to FM right now. It's not a technical or practical issue or a building issue. It's the people issue that is the biggest challenge. And those statistics really evidence that, didn't they? We're leading at the moment as if FM is still operating at the old pace, but that isn't really the case now. Leadership is there to go ahead rather than keep up, and so we need to go ahead rather than keep up. AI might augment human judgment, but leadership converts that activity and information into performance and is the glue that puts it all together. She talked about the 4 pillars of human-centric leadership. If you want to find out more about those, I imagine you have to buy the book, just a guess. And then we had James Bradley from Churchill talking about the future next generation leaders. I thought that was a really interesting presentation. And I thought that one of the things, I mean, he said 53% of Gen Z will stay 1 to 5 years in a role, but that isn't because they're disloyal, it's because they're prioritising growth and development. And so if you don't grow and develop them, they will go somewhere that will grow and develop them, because they are quite focused about what they would like. But here's something that I think is a key thought, is our leaders of tomorrow are probably already in our sector. So are we doing enough to find them and develop them, because they might already be here? He talked about the Own Your Own Futures programme, and how that has helped to build loyalty and develop people in the organisation. So if you're having challenges around attrition, people retiring, everyone getting old, maybe younger people leaving, are you looking carefully enough at your leadership development? Because that is one way to get great people to stay and grow, isn't it? And then we had another view from Simon Wren from Kindred FM, further down the FM ecosystem. I don't know where you put yourselves there. You're quite small fish. Where is he? Somewhere sort of below the whales and the sharks. And but that was quite interesting, because if 60% of young people want to be an entrepreneur, but only 16% of them start their own business, maybe the new leaders in the sector will come in through entrepreneurship because they can build their own thing. And maybe if they're not going to build their own company, can you harness that entrepreneurship by giving them a business division to build, or a sector to build, or something else that can tap into that, I want to grow something, I want to do something. I saw a statistic the other day that said that 41% of Gen Zs already have a side hustle before they start their first job. They already have their second string to their bow before they've started the first one. So people are wanting to take risks and try things out. And are we just stopping them from doing that in the workplace and saying, well, no, at work we've got a very structured way of doing things and you've got loads of ideas, but we don't want to hear them. Because maybe you should be having different conversations there. You can look at joining the Future Founders organisation to go and speak in schools and help inspire people to think about how they could become entrepreneurs and achieve things. So you can speak to Simon afterwards, or you can, if you didn't scan his QR code when he was speaking, you will have all the slides on the conference website, so you can find it there afterwards. And then we had Claire Atkins-Morris from Sodexo and Alex Hammond, Queen of Net Zero for NHS England, And that was really interesting, actually, that diagram about the whole kind of NHS net zero journey. Again, it's quite useful to see these things summarised, isn't it? What was interesting about that, the NHS has a complex and fragmented supply chain, and most of their emissions are scope 3, 98% for Sodexo, for example. But there were some really impressive outcomes and returns against things like Sodexo's science-based targets initiatives as a key supplier. And I think one of the big learnings that came out of that actually was the importance of creating a community of practice. And so we've got kind of big FM organisations, but within those organisations, where is your tribe that you can find that is talking about the kind of issues that you're talking about? And that's where the networking is valuable. When you go down to the bar, maybe you could be starting a new little community of practice around some of the things that we've talked about today. We had Nushchek Demir from Planon talking about future-ready, objectives-based IFM. Quite interesting to see how maintenance has evolved in that journey and some of those background factors. If AI can identify and fix an issue all by itself, as those kind of next iterations of the systems are going to be able to do, well, actually, for some of those things, isn't that great? Because now, instead of standing by the printer, waiting for the job ticket to come out that you wrote to go and fix that thing, you don't have to do any of that bit of the process anymore. So you can go away and find all those emerging leaders in your team and mentor them and get in a community of practice with them and inspire them and go and do a talk in a school, because you might have more time now, so you can use that to look at your talent gap. We then had Paul from Sky and Ryan Horton from CBRE talking about the power of partnership. That's quite a new partnership just starting off. One of the coolest places surely to work if you get to meet all of those people, even if you can't recognise them. But how CBRE became their supplier partner and how they're mobilising under a single brand, so that to all of those kind of end service users, if you like, the people that are experiencing that service, they just think people are here to help us and we don't really kind of know where they're from. That's not important to us. They come in and they are going to come and, how to turn up to a problem and fix it, and how to make sure we're not cleaning things that are already clean. That's a good little summary of FM, isn't it? I liked that. So good luck with that. I hope that goes really well. Enjoy all the famous people. And we finished off with Debbie Dobson from ISS. A workplace must be smart, but that won't make you feel like you belong. Social mobility, one of the great passions of mine, is fundamental, not extra. It's not part of CSR, it's actually part of your workforce strategy. So rather than trying to kind of bolt it on at the edge as a nice to have, if you've got talent problems, if you've got retention problems and you've got leadership development problems, you maybe have not thought imaginatively enough or cast your net widely enough, and they're looking at what has happened, what talent have they missed because of a lack of access, lack of pathways and lack of imagination, and their Mission Impossible programme is taking off, and numbers are already evidencing the success of that. So they were the speakers. What about the call to action? Now it's interesting, in 2024, one of the things that came out as a summary of that event, which was about AI, is AI won't replace you, but you might be replaced by someone who understands it better than you do. And I think that's still an interesting point for us to think about today, because when we're looking at those people and leadership and future issues, we're looking at those against a background of an increasingly technologically sophisticated environment, both in terms of buildings and the equipment and software and technologies that run them. So for those of us that are not Gen Z and starting our careers, we weren't born digital, but buildings are born digital now, and the people that are going to work in them are born digital as well. And so where do we need to learn and understand technology, and where do we need to think about how being a human being is going to be important in things like talent development, mentoring, spotting people and helping them to grow and develop, because I think these are things that people are going to be able to do better better than machines. The call to action in 2025 was to identify which business problem you're trying to solve, but I think actually today, in 2026, we've identified quite clearly what some of those challenges are about the future of FM. We can see what problems we need to solve, and we know that leadership development and engaging meaningfully with technology in a way that can actually support important outcomes for us in FM is where we need to head. So we kind of know what the challenge is. We need to think about how to address it. So I would say that the call to action for this year is that talent is a major challenge for FM. Your future leaders may already be in the sector, or they may still be at school or college. So think about what you can do, and not the kind of someone ought to, but we've got a lot of leaders and decision makers and senior people in this room. So not whether someone ought to do something, but what could you do to find that talent, engage with that talent, inspire that talent, and start that development journey, so that when all those people fall off the cliff edge of retirement, there's already a cohort of people ready and coming up behind in that succession planning role. I think that's a really clear call to action, and we've had loads of examples today of organisations that have already started doing that. Lots of ideas, lots of inspiration, lots of people to talk to, lots of information to share. All the information that you've seen is going to be available on the slides. Later, you'll be able to have the presentations, and there'll be the white paper to follow. So just to wrap up, I'd like to thank all of the speakers. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors and partners. I'd like to thank the IFM team for putting together another great event, the AV and Sound team, and to all of the people who have attended, both here in the room, and we've got a significant number of people attending online as well. So thank you to everybody for coming along, and thank you to all of you for staying until the end, purely because there's the promise of alcohol. And I think the aforementioned alcohol is in the bar downstairs. So do stay and network, do talk to people, do exchange ideas. We are a community of practice here in this room. You are with your tribe. So, stay and have a bevy with us. And I'll see you next year.